Okay, so thanks a lot. My name's Fred Laplace from London. I'm a member of the Zero COVID campaign in England, and our campaign says what's on the tin, which is to campaign for the elimination of COVID, for zero COVID, and we support much of the proposals which the independent SAGE, the Independent Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, does. Scientists based in London, but Anthony is based in Dublin in a similar organisation called ISAG, and he can talk about ISAG. But Tim is here as well. The two speakers are Tim Bierley from Global Justice Campaign and Anthony Staines. And we thought about having this conference, this session on big pharma and the epidemic, because obviously there's an unequal distribution of vaccines around the world, and it's something which COVID campaigns like ours and the World Health Network need to be aware of and address, so that we can raise it within each of our own countries with our governments. And I think it's particularly important now with the COP conference going on at the moment. And although we won't be the subject of this meeting, but we can, the discussions can evolve. But obviously, this pandemic and others have arisen by the contribution that the climate chaos and the environmental disasters have created conditions for such epidemics to arise. And we obviously need to bear that in mind, that the system we live in under now, with the big pharma and the environmental catastrophe, is contributing to the pandemic that we are living through now, unfortunately. So the first speaker will be Tim, followed by Anthony. Tim is a member of the Global Justice Campaign, and they've been campaigning around COVID, about big pharma, about patents, and I'll let him introduce that for 10 minutes or so, and Anthony will also speak for 10 minutes. Anthony is an epidemiologist and a public health consultant based in Dublin at Dublin City University, and he's been working with the Independent Scientific Advocacy Group in Ireland, which is similar to the Independent Station in London. Anyway, I'll shut up. My job is not to talk, to give the speeches that the speakers will give, so I'll hand it over straight away to Tim. Welcome, Tim.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for having me today. Can everyone hear me all right? My internet connection is okay, but not fantastic. We're clear. Okay, good. So yeah, as Fred said, I'm Tim. I work for Global Justice Now. We've been campaigning on the issue of pharmaceuticals for around 4 years now, looking at the way that big pharma operates generally, and especially the way that patents operate to control the flow of drugs and vaccines. And then obviously since the pandemic started, we've been looking very closely and taking a sort of critical view of the way that the vaccine response has been carried out. So yeah, my organisation does various work on trade, climate change, and pharma companies, but this is my main focus. So I think, as we all know, from the start of the pandemic, it became quite clear that a successful vaccine would be the quickest and most likely way out for everybody, and in theory, the best way to save lives and prevent new variants. So as we know it, we were all very relieved when Pfizer delivered the first vaccine last December, and then others, including Moderna and AstraZeneca, followed. But sort of the question I want to ask today is whether this vaccine-led pandemic response is working, and who for. And I think there's one stat that gives us a really clear picture on this. So I don't know if you saw the news, I think it was last week, but 9.4% of the UK population has now received a booster dose, compared with only 8.5% of Africa's population who have received even their first dose. So I'll come back to that, but one thing's for sure, it's been a very unequal response. So yeah, as we know, like pharmaceutical companies have in some quarters been hailed as the heroes of the COVID response. There were rumours that Pfizer would be awarded a Nobel Prize for its work. Meanwhile, in the UK, Boris Johnson has celebrated vaccines as proof of his belief that greed is good. Let the market lead, we're told. And it's true that the speed and efficacy of the vaccines has been incredible. And there's no doubt that many thousands of people have been kept alive because of them. But when we come to allocate credit, we have to think carefully about how we do so. So we're often told that pharma companies are getting their just reward for taking huge financial risks. But the picture is perhaps quite a bit muddier than this. So all of the vaccines that have been created so far are either wholly or significantly based on public funded research. So the mRNA technology was funded largely by the US's Biomedical Research and Development Authority. And that's the one that Pfizer and Moderna use. Meanwhile, Moderna's vaccine itself has been almost 100% publicly funded as well. You still get companies like Pfizer sort of protesting that they've not received public funding, but even they received huge advance purchase contracts before their vaccine was actually approved, giving them sort of making sure that there wasn't a huge risk for them in putting all the work towards the vaccine. So the story of private innovation is, for us, in large part a myth. A lot of this has been driven by public innovation, and yet that side of the narrative is perhaps often overlooked. But nonetheless, the vaccine rollout has been comprehensive in many parts of the world, and there were some hopes at the beginning of the pandemic that even with the record of pharmaceutical companies in often pursuing profit over public health, a new spirit of collaboration and coordination might emerge. So we have a couple of mechanisms through which vaccines which were posited for vaccine rollout across the world. The first one was the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, or CTAP, which was basically an attempt to pool all COVID technology, including vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics, and ensure that producers across the world would have access to that intellectual property, access to those recipes, and to ensure that, in a spirit of collaboration, manufacturers around the world would be able to draw on, a shared pool of knowledge. Now, CTAP was met with a huge wall of resistance. Pharma companies and governments warned it was a threat to free enterprise, and Pfizer's CEO described the idea of sharing know-how as nonsense. A year later, CTAP had precisely zero contributions. COVAX was instead the favoured mechanism, which was sort of promoted and supported by the Bill Gates Foundation. And it was intended to serve as an end-to-end program spanning vaccine development to delivery for each country in the world. So it would invest in several vaccine candidates from different companies, and COVAX would improve everyone's chances of having a successful vaccine. Because high and income countries were intended to buy into COVAX, that sort of was supposed to create a situation in which poorer countries would receive vaccines for free, funded by donations from wealthy governments and charities. It aimed to meet the needs of 20% of each country's population. Now, by September this year, COVAX had contributed just 5% of all vaccines administered globally, and had announced it would miss its 2 billion target for 2021. Meanwhile, rich countries have used COVAX to court headlines that demonstrate their generosity, or purported generosity, but do very little to help. Rich countries so far have pledged 1.8 billion doses, but just 14% of those have actually materialized so far. So we have a situation of huge vaccine inequality at the moment. Only 1.3% of people living in the poorest parts of the world are fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, wealthy nations are sort of still saying that they're committing to a timetable of delivering more doses at some point in 2022, or reaching 70%, I think by the middle of 2022. But there's no clear plan for achieving that. And I think, as we saw today, their projections and the projections of a lot of these companies are often sort of vastly exaggerated. So we saw today that Moderna, their share price fell because it hadn't been able to meet the number of vaccines that it said that it would be able to produce this year. Meanwhile, pharma companies are making huge profits off this. Pfizer will generate at least $33 billion in 2021 alone. I think that's been upgraded to 36 since I wrote this. That makes it now the most lucrative drug ever in existence in terms of annual revenue. Meanwhile, Moderna's share price has gone up 600%. So in this situation of vaccine inequality and huge profits, what can we do to change this? So we're campaigning for what we call a people's vaccine, which will see the vaccine produced rapidly at scale and made available for everyone in all countries free of charge. The main change that we wanted to see at the beginning of this campaign was for governments to join the CTAP patent pool. Given that most governments have resisted this so far, and given that India and South Africa sort of came to the fore with an alternative proposal, our key hope, our key recommendation, our key demand right now is for intellectual property rules to be waived for the duration of the COVID pandemic, so that know-how, patents, and data exclusivity are no longer the sort of domain of corporate capital concentration, and more companies have the recipes and the means to produce the vaccine. So this is a demand made by India and South Africa, which has been backed by over 100 countries. It's blocked by some, including my own country of the UK. The EU and especially Germany have also been key blockers of the proposal, while Pharma continues to describe this idea as nonsense. So at the moment, we have a key moment coming up at the end of November. There's a World Trade Organization ministerial where decisions like this tend to be made. So we're continuing to press for a patent waiver. To be clear, some pharma companies say that only they are, a patent waiver would not make any difference. They make the case, in our opinion, a completely false case, that there doesn't exist a capacity to take advantage of a patent waiver. So even if these blocks of international property were waived, you wouldn't have companies who are able, there don't exist companies who are able to take advantage of that. However, there was a recent piece in the New York Times which demonstrated very clearly that there are at least 10 vaccine and pharma companies around the world that would be able to scale up production of vaccines very quickly and would be more likely to prioritize markets in the global south if the patent waiver came into place. I'm aware that I have probably been speaking for close to 10 minutes now. I don't know. I had one small thing that I wanted to talk about quickly.
Carry on.
Shut up. Okay, so I think we've had immense frustrations throughout this campaign. It's been very frustrating that my country, the UK, has continued to block this. We've had continued weasel words about increasing donations. You have companies like Moderna saying that they will donate 110 million vaccines, or they will sell 110 million vaccines to the African Union. But these are just a tiny percentage of what could actually be achieved. There are some signs of hope. So Moderna, in a sort of rather token move, did say that it wouldn't enforce patents on its vaccine. This means something to the extent that it means countries will not get sued, potentially. I mean, we're not completely certain this is the case, or we're not completely credulous, I suppose. But without the know-how and without the data, it's hard for countries and manufacturers to take advantage of this sort of commitment. So right now, possibly one of the more exciting developments is a factory in South Africa, or a company in South Africa is supported by the World Trade Organization to reverse engineer Moderna's mRNA vaccine. So in a sort of, I guess what I would describe as a glimpse of what an alternative pharmaceutical system could look like, rather than doing this in order to take their slice of the monopoly profits which are generated by the existing pharmaceutical companies. This company in South Africa would become a vaccine hub which would then teach other manufacturers around the world how to make the mRNA vaccine. This is sort of particularly exciting because this technology has the potential to eradicate many diseases from malaria to HIV. But nonetheless, Moderna continues, while it has this public position saying that it won't enforce patents, it continues to refuse to share its recipes with the South African vaccine hub, which would greatly speed up production. So it's a glimpse of a new world, but one which is yet to bear fruit. I will stop there.
And that's what we're here to do, to try and make a new and better, healthy and safe world come about. So thanks a lot, Tim. That's very informative. Great. So Anthony is here. As I said, Anthony Staines is a professor at Dublin University of Epidemiology and in public health. So Anthony will speak now. Unfortunately, he's on his mobile phone, so we won't see him, but he is here. He will speak. So Anthony, it's over to you. I think you've got to unmute yourself, or somebody.
You'll just have to imagine me. I'm a fairly typical Irishman, which is to say I'm more or less blotchy pink, and because I'm in my 60s, I have white hair, and I'm currently wearing a blue jacket and waiting to go for a COVID test, ironically enough, watching various lorries apparently parking on the road in front of me. So that'll be exciting. So why does this matter? There's a couple of things. If you ask yourself, what value do pharmaceutical companies add? If you look at development costs of drugs, the large majority of the development costs of most modern drugs are met by research funding from one source or another, often the state, sometimes the European Union, sometimes some international body, but most of the money comes from essentially the public sector. And this is because, as the drug companies will tell you quite correctly, drug development is extremely risky. And if you ask what is the function of the public sector, it is precisely to take the risks that the private sector cannot and will not take. That's why the public sector runs things like armies and universal health services and universal access postal services, none of which are particularly appealing to the private sector. What do you need to make vaccines? What the pharmaceutical companies bring to it is scale and quality control. So they have high level of scale and they have good quality control. And it's much harder to make stuff in quantity and to maintain quality while you're making it than you might casually think. I used to work for a blood transfusion service, and we make a product which hasn't changed appreciably. We make platelets, plasma, red blood cells, and a few other bits and bobs, but we make a product which hasn't changed appreciably since World War I. But we have enormous staff, enormous resources, enormous costs doing quality control and ensuring consistency of product. And that's something drug companies are very good at. And you mentioned, Tim, a couple of different things. Patents, the companies are quite correct. They could give their patents away in the morning and it would have very little impact on anyone, because you can't make biopharmaceuticals from patents alone. And a lot of what you need comes under the general heading of know-how. So if you're a drug company, and one of my colleagues used to do this for a living, they would take a production line that was making a tablet, typically a fairly simple product, in one country. And their job was to set up the same production line in another country, making the same tablet to standard. And that was a full-time job for a team of people who went around the world making paracetamol tablets and ibuprofen tablets and all the other tablets that are needed for the day-to-day business of a drug company. As you can possibly imagine, doing this for vaccines is several orders of magnitude more complicated and considerably more difficult. So that is something which pharmaceutical companies genuinely add value. But the price we're paying for the mechanisms we've chosen to reward them is extremely high. We know this virus is capable of generating new and exciting strains that behave much worse than existing strains. We've seen it. Most of our countries now are dominated by a single strain, which emerged one place, where essentially there was uncontrolled replication of virus. And we are beginning to get a feel from my colleagues in virology, and I must say I only very hazily understand the scope of their explorations, but we're beginning to get a feel from their work of where this virus is capable of going. And it's not reassuring. In answer to the question, is worse than Delta out there? The answer seems to be clearly yes. And the more cases we have globally, the more likely it is that a vaccine will come along and bite us. The OECD did an economic analysis about 12 months ago, and they asked the question, compared with how much it would cost to protect high-risk people in the global population. That was largely healthcare workers and the elderly. That was their focus. In comparison to that cost, what would the benefit be to wealthy countries? And the benefit to wealthy countries was approximately 3 times the cost of taking this action. They estimated, I don't know if their figures are correct or not, but they estimated you could vaccinate all the relevant people for about 30 billion, and that you would gain substantially more than that in improved trade. Never mind the benefits you might gain in the countries in which they've happened. But that sensible analysis was not taken up. And as a result, we find ourselves in a situation where in many parts of the world, hospital systems are collapsing because healthcare workers are getting sick. Healthcare workers are dying. And healthcare workers are hard to replace. If you look around, those of you who are from wealthy countries, look around your hospitals and ask the question, where do your healthcare workers come from? And what you will probably find is a disproportionate share of your healthcare workers come from poorer countries. So we are very fortunate in Ireland. We have a large number of nurses from the Philippines working here. But that leaves the Philippines with a challenge, which is, where do they get nurses from? So what we're dealing with is a failure to understand how all of these pieces hang together, how the costs and benefits of vaccine protection, how the costs and profits give Pfizer 30 billion to increase their profits than to do what they've done. We've ended up with a monstrously inefficient, very expensive and very unfair way of distributing resources around the world, and a way which puts us at unquantifiable risk. Because no one knows, will there be another new variant? And no one knows if that new variant could be worse than the ones we have at the moment. The virologists tell us that there's no biological reason for that. But clearly the process itself is very much down to chance. So we're now in a situation where if this happens again, you may or may not have read an article by Maria van Kerkhove and colleague Mike Ryan and some WHO colleagues about preparing for the next pandemic. What have we learned? One of the things we've learned is that vaccines are really central to pandemic response. And the really good news about COVID was we came up with a vaccine very quickly. We came up with a vaccine much faster than anyone had expected we would be able to do. And that's a remarkable and extraordinary achievement. But if we have a pandemic X, if we have a much worse disease, perhaps spreading equally quickly, but with a higher case fatality rate, we are not going to be able to rely on mechanisms we have in place now to make vaccination available. We have to do better. We have to do faster. And above all, we have to learn from the mistakes we have made this time. We may be in a situation that the drug companies and their shareholders have made short-term profits. But as is the case, for example, for the fossil fuel industry, where the profits are short-term, the costs are very long-term, the cost of a failed vaccine distribution system for us as a species could be uncomfortably high. I think that's my 10 minutes, so I will shut up there and pass you back to Fred. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. That was very moving as well. And so, okay, the meeting's open to the people that are here, and put your questions, your comments, your contributions. I would suggest, we've only got half an hour or so left, less than that now. So if you could keep to about 3 or 4 minutes or so, then maybe everybody can come in. I think what you've got to do is to unmute yourself, unless there's a system for raising a hand so they'll kind of an orderly row or queue. But anyway, who wants to come in or ask a question? No?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep, come in.
Yeah, okay. I think you have to be in the first row to actually ask a question.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry to unmute. Yeah, my name is Evan Blake. I'm a writer with the World Socialist website. I just wanted to thank the panelists. I think both presentations were really quite striking. I think the issue of the vaccines being, we had the report by Dr. Gasparovich yesterday on really the need to combine vaccines with public health measures. But I think really, these are incredibly powerful tools. And I guess I was wondering if maybe Tim could speak a bit further on the opposition. You mentioned the opposition by the UK, Germany, and the EU to lifting intellectual property rights. I guess I was wondering if you could speak a bit further on that and sort of what the most recent development is with this, and also what type of pressure has been brought to bear on them both to lift these rights and also to enforce them.
Okay, let's see who else wants to come in. We'll take 2 or 3 comments, contributions at the same time. So I think probably you've got to click on your icon and move it up to the big row, if that's right, am I correct? So anybody else want to pop in and tell us what's happening in their country in terms of big pharma and vaccine distribution and so on and so forth, maybe? I mean, I might just add something which in terms of South Africa and big pharma, it was recently discovered by a campaign in South Africa called the Health Justice Initiative, about the role that Johnson & Johnson played in the country, which was they were actually manufacturing vaccines in South Africa, but then re-exported them to the richer countries, and without distributing them in any significant amounts in South Africa, or let alone the rest of Africa. And that's bearing in mind that vaccination rates in Africa are about 2%, while in Britain it's over 66%, 68% now. Right? So that's a concerning thing. And just to come back to the AIDS medicines, at the end, what happened was that a number of countries, I think it was including India and South Africa, because they weren't able to obtain the medicines for the people infected with AIDS, they actually decided to manufacture them themselves. I'm not sure if it was a process of reverse engineering, but nevertheless, they did it. They broke the patents, and that was a public health emergency. And in a public health emergency, I think it's important that we need to do what needs to be done, regardless of the legal niceties. Anyway, I'll stop there. Anybody else want to come and ask a question? Tim, do you want to come back for a minute or two and
that's the kind of example, Fred, I suppose, that gives us a bit of hope and the kind of thing that we want to be taking inspiration from as well. And I suppose it's why it's so inspiring right now that the South African government is one of the ones taking the lead again on this. In terms of the question of opposition by the UK and Germany and the EU, I think the UK's position right now is that the sort of international agreements on intellectual property are sufficient right now to meet the needs of the pandemic. So the UK sort of argues that because this agreement, the TRIPS agreement is the name of the agreement, which covers this, because it allows for what is called compulsory licensing during public health crises, because it allows for that, it argues that there's no intellectual property barrier. Now, this is sort of one of those lines, and it's also one sort of peddled slightly by the EU. It's one of those lines which is a bit disingenuous, because while there is that stipulation, compulsory licensing, or where governments allow for patent rules to be broken in these kind of situations, again, they only apply to patents. So as Anthony was saying earlier, all of the rest of the processes, all of the technological know-how, the data, for example, on testing, would not be covered by these sort of mechanisms within various governments' capabilities. The sort of various other technical barriers as well. I think the fact is that economies like the UK's are sort of deeply financialized. Germany has a very large pharmaceutical industry as well, and these are all sources of geopolitical power and of financial power as well. So I think, personally, I think a lot of countries like the UK, Germany, and the EU are sort of very reluctant to set a precedent, which could potentially show the possibility of a new way of doing healthcare. You have had some countries like the US and Australia backing a certain kind of patent waiver. The US's support is conditional. It doesn't support India and South Africa's position exactly. It supports a waiver on patents for vaccines rather than for therapeutics and diagnostics as well, and it would be very time limited. And then in terms of pressure that can be put on the UK government, on the EU governments, I mean, for me, I think the way that Anthony was speaking about the risks of new variants I think in many ways that is and can be the source of greatest pressure, because it sort of appeals to government's first and foremost traditional priority of national security, I suppose, and certainly something maybe that the Conservatives in the UK are more likely to respond favourably to than than people who would like to see a nicer world, I suppose, and a more just world. So, I mean, there are various organisations, including our own, which continue trying to put the pressure on to the government, and we're trying to mobilise more pressure within the UK and try to get public opinion on our side, which it is already. I think there was polling out previously which said that I think 60% of the British population at least supported a waiver on vaccines, but it's a hard government to shift. Like, I'm not going to make any bones about that, but I think the fact is, the fact that the US has backed it, and that Australia has backed a version of the waiver, is a sign that it is possible. And I think, as we sort of always say, like, if not now, when is the issue? When you're in the middle of a pandemic of the proportions we've seen, if this is when the kind of situation in which intellectual property ought to be waived, if it's not going to happen now, like, when is it going to happen? I think you're muted again, Fred.
Anthony, do you want to add anything? Okay, well, while Anthony sorts out his mute button, does anybody else want to come in and share their thoughts with us or ask a question again? I mean, what's happening in the States? I mean, in terms of obviously, and France as well. I mean, is anybody from France here who could tell us about? It's also a big pharmaceutical a country with a big pharmaceutical industry with Sanofi and others, right? And Switzerland as well has got big pharmaceuticals.
So I'm from Germany, but I can only say something on the US.
Go on. That's good. We're not asking you to show your passport.
Because in Germany everything is lost, so I simply follow what's going on in the US. Yeah, I mean, I mean, many of you will probably have heard of the WHO mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub, which they are building in South Africa, and and they have originally like asked all kinds of pharmaceutical companies whether they're willing to share their technology, and they got a couple of donors, including for example also support by one of the inventors of the technology used by Moderna and BioNTech, which is what was his name? Whatever. And there's at the moment and so first they thought they will develop a new platform which was provided by them, but like, especially given the differences now between the efficacy of different vaccines, also against variants and long-term efficacy, they now said they want to have a vaccine as close as possible to the Moderna vaccine, and Moderna at least agreed to negotiate also on technology transfer with the WHO, and there are also patents involved which are held by the US government, and actually this Moderna vaccine, I mean, it is actually a Moderna NHI vaccine, because it has been also co-developed by the US National Health Institutes, and there's currently like campaigning also on Moderna to share the technology, especially like for these reasons. And I think like for our perspective, it's also to some points are also important. First of all, maybe that like especially concerning vaccines, we can't only argue that it's about getting vaccines at all, but it's also about getting like the best vaccines, getting also next generation vaccines when they will be there, which might be which could also help in suppressing the variants. And especially if we take this into account, then there will be a lot of need for vaccines also still during the next year. And well, these arguments are faulty, which say the problem of scarcity is now solved anyways. And yeah, and I mean, what's also like interesting is like the long term perspective, whether this whether actually, especially this mRNA technology, which is in principle easier in the manufacturing process than many other or than all the other vaccine technologies. At least it needs less safety checks, less. It has a less complicated process, and actually the question would be whether this technological shift might be a chance to establish much wider, much more decentralized, and maybe also much more democratized networks of vaccine production in this world. Also, of course, for other diseases.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Anybody else want to come in under the front row? I think if you move yourself to the front row, then you can speak. Anybody's got any views about big pharma, like others in Glasgow now are campaigning again on big oil? We're campaigning on big pharma here. Anthony, do you want to share some thoughts about the discussion so far?
Sorry, I've just joined, so I don't know. Unless you're speaking to the other Anthony.
No, Anthony Staines from Dublin, who may have some communications problem because he's on his mobile phone. Okay, so I mean, I hate to bring Tim back in, but maybe you can give us some indications again to the people here about what sort of campaigning initiatives are happening in the months ahead. You know, you mentioned the World Health Organization and the WTO, which is obviously crucial in terms of patents, and you mentioned TRIPS, which is the trade-related intellectual property, I think is the correct the full term, right? You know, and obviously, you know, trade deals now are because of globalization. You know, a lot of the trade deals are done in such a way that, regardless of the laws that you adopt in your own country, private companies can sue governments for changes in the laws in order to protect good laws, which go through governments, you know, through public pressure in each country, laws designed to protect public health. For example, governments have been sued for putting on cigarette packets, you know, the health warnings, which are absolutely necessary, right? So, you know, these are things which, in terms of pharmaceutical products, vaccines, medicines, etc., we need to bear in mind as well, right? So, that's me just speaking what other people think about a question or want to make a comment. Okay, well, if Anthony Staines can't get in, I'll bring Tim in again. Anthony, I think maybe I can hear the cars behind you. I can hear the cars as well, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, it is really important that we get this sorted out, because we may not be in the happy position next time of having a virus as amenable as COVID-19. When I want to press my friends, I tell them something which is true, which is that this is not the virus public health is worried about. We were worried about something much worse than COVID-19. And I sincerely hope that we never see it. But we have to be ready for it. And we're not ready. We're just not ready. If you view this as a dress rehearsal for climate change, we demonstrated we're not ready for that either. So this is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call for all of us. I think you mentioned at the beginning, Fred, the ways in which emerging infectious diseases are driven by changes in food production, by changes in where people live. We are doing things to our ecosystem that we don't understand. We only find out about it when there's a really nasty surprise later. So what are we doing to our ecosystem now that we don't understand? It's going to come back and bite us. We have got to become much more reflective what we're doing if we want to continue. And I would prefer if, 2 generations from now, medical students are being taught in universities with computers and not in thatched huts with ground up herbs and notes written on vellum with pens. But either is possible. And it's very much our choice which we do. But I know which I would prefer to see. I would greatly prefer that we figure out a way to continue with something like the advantages of our current civilization. And we should view these things that have come to us as tests and ask ourselves, are we more ready for a pandemic now than we were?
Yeah.
I think our politicians have got the vocabulary and our populations have got the vocabulary. But I'm not sure if we're actually more prepared. And I'm worried about that. So I'll leave it there, if I may.
Thank you. Yes. I think Anthony is right in terms of to remind us about the ecology of the planet, which is creating conditions for pathogens to jump species. There's an author who's also a scientist called Rob Wallace, who's written a book called Big Farm Means Big Flu. So if you have a chance to grab it and read it, or to hear Rob Wallace speak, then I would recommend that. Does anybody else want to come in or chip in, share their thoughts with us? We've still got a few minutes before we need to close the meeting, so feel free. Right.
I have a question for everyone else, if that would be useful.
Go on. Yes.
So I think someone asked a little bit about what our campaigns will look like in the coming weeks and months ahead. So obviously in the build up to this World Trade Organization meeting, this big one at which a decision may be made, we're doing as much sort of lobbying and media work as possible to build pressure for that event. However, thinking about everything that Anthony has said and everything that everybody else has said today, I think one of our big aims over the next 6 months is to ensure that this is a moment in which we learn and we act as well. Sort of, this is a time to build a movement for a different approach to public health. So I suppose, what I would be interested to hear from everybody who's here today is sort of, I suppose, I have a sort of a slight feeling that within progressive circles, within circles which would like to see a more equal world, I suppose, issues of pharma and global health are sometimes neglected. It's understandable, obviously, that climate change is our primary concern right now. But I would be interested to know if there are sort of obstacles to engagement, or I suppose, the kind of the kind of movements that they would like to be a part of, I suppose, and what they think would help reach out to their friends who weren't able to make it to this meeting today, I suppose.
Question to the audience. Anybody want to pop up and share their thoughts about, or put a question again?
Yeah, if you allow me.
Go on, absolutely.
My name is Dr. Khalid Lawad. I'm public health consultant by profession. I think addressing global health is...
So just a minute, Anthony, can you switch off your microphone because we can hear the cars behind you? Thank you.
So I think the question of global health, addressing global health, is becoming more concern for all of us. And as we are human, we are involved. Also, viruses are involved. I think what have been shown in this pandemic, that in COVID-19, that sometimes we are doing much of surveillance efforts in influenza, because we were expecting that we will have pandemic influenza. And we have large policies in each organization about pandemic influenza. We never thought that there will come a new virus like corona, and then it will mutate. Although there was an early indication of Middle East coronavirus when it was established in the Middle East as one of the coronaviruses. We had before the 4 coronavirus, that usual seasonal coronavirus that we are seeing, and they're just causing a simple flu. So this evolving in virus evolution, it shows that as a human we are not ready for it. Even with our surveillance program, the thing that we are doing, still there is we are very behind on it. So I think from here forward, and also this also will address also the big pharma, because our concern, the whole concern was in the base during this pandemic, and when the vaccine was produced, the accelerability of the vaccine and all of these questions that have been public have been addressed. Although there was vigorous trials, experimental trials for approving these vaccines, but still there will always be a challenge. How can we do a better surveillance system? In the same time, how can also we monitor very well the big pharma and what they are doing for future? Because in the end, for them, it's about profit, and we know that. For us, it's about human health. Although there are incentives. But still, I think a better surveillance system, better communication with big pharma, better planning with them. They have to be in our plans all the time, and also better global response. We need more global partnership. We have seen a very selfish kind of behavior from countries that they have the money when the vaccine was produced. We're putting developing countries and other countries that they cannot get the vaccine. And we see some of the countries that they already control the pandemic in their country. So I think all these questions have been addressed by WHO. WHO have been very concerned. And they put their accelerator for that, but still, I think all these questions need to be discussed very openly between us as a human, as people working in health, to understand how can we make better future. Climate change, I think it's in the heart of it, but still, as I said, if you put a virus on the table, he will never live without a human. He needs a human to survive. So they are evolving, we are evolving. So this is the lesson need to be addressed.
Thank you very much. We've only got about 2 minutes left before we close this session and move on to the next one. So I'll just let Anthony and Tim come back for a minute each or so. So Anthony, if you can hear us, are you still around, Anthony, or have you had to go to your test? I can't see Anthony anymore. So look, Tim, why don't you make some concluding remarks, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.
So I wasn't able to catch all of that because my speakers are not the best. But I think one of the things that we've thought a lot about, and my colleagues before me have written about as well, when we talk about the possibility of a different kind of a different kind of global health system, is the fact that a lot of the bricks are in theory in place already. So, as we've discussed already today, all of these vaccines are wholly or partly funded by public research, and yet we have these pharmaceutical companies which we are to an extent beholden to, which make huge profits from our health systems, and which prioritize our markets because they know they can make huge profits from us, whereas they know that they won't get the same level of money from selling to poorer countries. One of the main things we've surely got to do is establish a very clear rule that where research and development is publicly funded, it comes with strings attached. It needs to be. It can't just be fall under the monopoly control of pharmaceutical companies, and it must be used for public good rather than for profit. So I think that's one of the key things that we need to be doing, is putting pressure on our governments, A, to invest more in government research, and B, when we do that, to ensure that it's publicly controlled. So this is a very possible thing. When Bernie Sanders was running as the Democrat nominee, he suggested putting towards 0.5% of US GDP towards pharma R&D, which is actually more than the top 5 big pharma companies put in themselves. And that would allow countries like the US, if the political will was there, control over how these companies operate. It's 4 o'clock, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much.